So, our first speaker is Professor Timothy Brooks, the author of Quelling the People, this book here. Tim had recently joined Stanford University, where he's a specialist in Chinese history. He received his PhD in history from Harvard University. And before joining Stanford, he had taught Chinese history for 10 years at the University of Toronto. He just told me that it turns out for personal reasons he's going to be moving back to Toronto. So his stay out here has been short, but we're delighted that he's been out here. In addition to his book, Quelling the People, his books on China include Praying for Power, The Asiatic Mode of Production in China, Culture and Economy, China and Historical Capitalism, and The Confusions of Pleasure. But it was beginning with his work as an exchange student in China from 1974 to 76 when he began his interest in human rights and worked with Amnesty International. The result was the authoring and then later publication of this book in 1992. So I'm very pleased to introduce Tim Brooks.
I want to talk to you about memory today. The film we just saw was an example of memory. It's remembering Tiananmen in a certain way. And what I want to do in the 15 or 20 minutes that I'm going to speak here is to think about, to ask, how should we remember Tiananmen? What does this memory mean? Why might it be important? And why might it not be important? Anniversaries are powerful moments. Anniversaries are moments when we try and remember things. We try and remember things that were important in our life that perhaps have slipped into inattention with daily life. Anniversaries are points when we can try and take stock of what we've been doing with our lives and where we've gone. Anniversaries are also opportunities, if one side forgets, for the other side to get annoyed. I constantly do this with my wife. She'll eventually get used to the fact that I always forget our anniversary. But there are certain historical anniversaries that are hard to forget. China is a country in which anniversaries are extremely important, perhaps because there's not much of a public sphere. People can't discuss all the issues they'd like to. And so at certain moments in the calendar, certain years in a decade will become more important than others. 1999 is the 50th year of the founding of the People's Republic, the beginning of the rule of the Communist Party in China. And it's also the 10th year of Tiananmen. And I'm delighted that the Independence Institute has chosen to remember Tiananmen this year. There have been a number of other venues around North America to think about Tiananmen and think where we stand now. Let me start, though, with the fateful moment. Mr. Thoreau has given you some sense of the issues that were in play in June of 1989. The moment that turned these issues, which issues of democracy, accountability, personal responsibility, clean government, these issues, of course, are universal around the world. But the point at which the issues were no longer simply issues, but something more, came about 10:45 on the night of June the 3rd. The People's Liberation Army started moving in on the city. You saw some of this on the film clip. They started moving in on the city of Beijing late in the afternoon of June the 3rd. There were columns coming in from all the points of the compass. Two of the largest columns were coming in from the west and from the southwest. The column coming in from the west got stopped. And it wasn't students that stopped the army, nor was it by and large students who died. Most of the people who fought the army and died were ordinary citizens. The column coming in from the west was stopped about 8:30 at night. The soldiers were told to chant, "We will put an end to the turmoil. Soldiers don't stop until the turmoil stops." You certainly saw turmoil on the film a few minutes ago. The question, of course, is who started the turmoil? Did the government try and stop it, or did it in fact get it going? Around 10 p.m., warning shots were fired into the air. People scattered, but they immediately came back. In fact, the crowd was angered with the warning shots and called out, "Put down your arms, put down your arms," to the soldiers. By 10:30, the officer in charge of this group was losing patience, and he screamed, "Charge, you bunch of cowards, sweep away this trash." And at 10:35, several dozen stun grenades were tossed. Now, stun grenades don't hurt unless you actually get hit with one, but they make a terrible noise. They stun you, they terrify you, and you run away. The stun grenades didn't work. The soldiers got another 100 meters down the road, and then again, people just poured in and stopped the army. And so at this point, they radioed to the military Central Command for permission to go ahead at any cost, which is the euphemism for using live ammunition on unarmed civilians. The permission came in just before 10:45, which is when an eyewitness I talked to saw the first bodies being removed. The column coming in from the southwest went through the same experience. They got permission to move ahead at any cost at 10:48, and the firing started there as well. And this has happened all around the city. Some columns didn't get permission till 2 or 3 in the morning of June the 4th, but eventually the permission came in, and the army made it to the square and occupied the square on June 4th. So that's the moment that turned what was a largely peaceful, somewhat confused, but always lively attempt to talk about democracy in China into the massacre that we remember today. And without that order to go ahead at any cost, we wouldn't be here today 10 years later trying to remember the event. Well, some people say we should forget Tiananmen. They suggest that China is changing. The forces that caused the violence 10 years ago have now passed. We needn't worry about it anymore. The urge to forget is also perhaps tied to certain interests. Perhaps certain business interests that don't want boats rocked, perhaps with certain government interests, certainly in China, elites who are in power and wish to remain in power. And how do you forget? Well, you say that Tiananmen doesn't matter. I was at a conference actually in Toronto on June the 4th. A conference was organized there to remember Tiananmen. And a political scientist got up and spoke, and he said his view of Tiananmen was the hiccup theory. That is, Tiananmen was just a hiccup. And by and large, the changes that got going in the 1980s, the economic liberalization has carried forward, and Tiananmen doesn't matter. I tend not to favor the hiccup theory. I think remembering is important. So why remember an event this atrocious? I overheard someone in the audience saying that she didn't like to look at death on the video. Neither, frankly, do I. I don't care for this footage. But I think every death is a loss. But not more importantly, equally importantly, states have a responsibility to protect the lives and property of their citizens. And in this case, this didn't happen. So how do we remember Tiananmen? Well, there have been many efforts of different sorts to remember what happened in 1989. The first thing was to start building replicas of the goddess of democracy. They've appeared all over the world. Most cities with a large Chinese community put up some kind of a memorial to Tiananmen in 1990, 1991. It seemed that the first urge was to mourn. But something more is needed, and starting about 1993, there have been efforts in China to get the government to rethink what happened in 1989, to rethink its decision. In 1993, a famous document called the Peace Charter was published. Several prominent and less prominent Chinese put their names to it, calling for a more peaceful process of transition in China. It was followed in 1995 with a somewhat more strongly worded document called Draw Lessons from June 4th. These documents wanted to do what is called in Chinese reversing the verdict, to change the judgment on Tiananmen. One of the people who was involved in this was a student named Li Hai. He had been collecting information about people who had died. He'd put together files on about 900 of the people who died. And he was arrested in 1996, and he was put in jail for 9 years for doing this. His mother, Gung Liwen, continues to be campaigning for his release. She's only campaigning for him. Her first concern is the memory of her son's freedom, but she hopes that her campaign will unlock the cages to several thousand more people who are held on political charges in China. 1997, the Legislative Council in Hong Kong did the same thing. They passed a motion calling for a reappraisal, a reversal of verdict. Well, to reverse a verdict is a major thing to achieve in Chinese politics. China's political voice is unitary, it's univocal, the only voice, by and large, is the Communist Party. For it to reverse its verdict means for it to say it did something wrong. And most of us don't like to admit doing wrong, and the Communist Party even more so, because the issue is, if it admits it was wrong, perhaps it's admitting that it is no longer the legitimate voice in the government. So asking for a reappraisal is politically a powerful thing. But in the last couple of years, there is yet another wave of thinking about how to remember Tiananmen. And this is to call for a judicial tribunal, to ask for an investigation that has legal consequences, that may result in some people going to prison for their activities in June 4th. The first outspoken person to do this is Ding Zilin. Ding Zilin is a now retired professor from Beijing University. She had one son, Zhang Jilian, and Zhang disappeared on the night of June 4th into the crowds, and he eventually died. Ding has been working tirelessly since 1989 to try and bring together the victims of 1989 and their families, and to get them to agitate for some kind of redress. But in 1997, she submitted a petition to the National People's Congress calling for a legal tribunal. So no longer is it simply, we want to reverse the verdict. The call now is for some kind of judicial proceeding to be mounted. It fell on deaf ears, but it was a powerful first statement. She's repeated this this year, and it's not only her voice now, but many other voices are saying that China needs to have some kind of a judicial inquiry into 1989. There are some who wonder what the purpose of this is, particularly in a world in which we have more atrocities than any of us can deal with. We have Yugoslavia, we have Kosovo, we have Rwanda, we have Somalia, we have Iran, we have Kuwait. The list is almost endless. Why care about a couple of thousand people dying in Beijing? Well, I think we can't all care about everything, but I think it's important that when violence is used by the state in protection of its own interests, it is necessary for people to speak out against it. And I think for consequences to be applied. I thought what I would do, in fact, is end my comments with a message that Ding Zilin circulated this March to talk about her efforts to try and find out about the victims of June the 4th. She goes on at some length to talk about the various stories she can tell about what she's done to try and track down the victims. By and large, victims' families don't want this kind of news to get out. And she finishes her report by saying, I'll stop writing now because this is not a story. It is not meant to just provoke the easy tears of readers. I often consider the fact that people have only one life, only one. Life is sacred, but death also is sacred. If everyone could see life and death in this way, maybe we could decrease the number of calamities and massacres. As Chinese people, we may have many goals and dreams, but I think we must put a priority on establishing a moral system in which the reckless disregard for human life is put behind us. If someone were to ask me, why did you choose to document death? I think that this would be my answer. And so I would say the same thing, in fact, for the book that I ended up writing, Quelling the People. It's a book about violence. It's a book about death and destruction. And I felt, as a China historian, I had the responsibility to create a public record that someday will be more widely accepted and hopefully perhaps even heard in a court of law. Thank you for coming tonight, and I'm just the professor. You have two student leaders who are actually going to talk to you, so let me turn it over to them.
It's pretty widely recognized, I think, today that if you're interested in the real story, as far as best we can surmise, this is really the book on the incident. So if you're interested seriously, I can't recommend it more highly. Our next speaker is Dan Chun-Yi, who's one of the founders of the Guangzhou Patriotic Student Federation. After June 4th, 1989, he was arrested by the Chinese government because of his leadership in the student democracy movement and for organizing underground activities after the crackdown. At the time, he was a college sophomore studying business administration. Later, he was sentenced to 2 years in prison. After his release from prison in 1991, he went back to school only to find himself not only expelled from the school he was at before, but also refused by every school he tried to get into in China, because the government, of course, controlled them all. Eventually, he emigrated to America, and he's currently majoring in computer information systems at San Francisco State University. I'm delighted to introduce Dan, who will be, I think, giving you a pretty interesting perspective.
Well, I did my homework. I told Carl I'm not a good speaker in English, but I did my homework, and hopefully you can understand my English with grammar errors. Just like Mr. Brook said, some people said we should forget June 4th. And one of the point they support is because the economics is developing and not a change in China. But I don't agree with them. Actually, just a couple of weeks ago, on June 4th, many reporters asked me, do you think any change, anything has been changed since, after 10 years, since the Tiananmen Square massacre? My answer was always no. Why I say that? 10 years ago, on May 17, 1989, I represent the students in Canton, deliver a petition letter to the Canton province government. In the letter, we demand the central government to do 7 things, 7 items. First, protect the citizens, the freedom of speech. Remove all restrictions from press. Also, put Mr. Qin Benli back to the general editor position of the World Economic Guardians. Mr. Qin Benli was dismissed at the end of April. World Economic Guardians was a newspaper in China which was prohibited to continue to publish after they report some discussion about the event, Huelbang's death, which caused the students' movement at the beginning. And number 2 item we require is publicize the property of the leaders and their children. The 3, re-evaluate the anti-spiritual pollution and anti-capitalism freedom movement. The 4 is we demand that Department of Security should stop control and watching the Chinese intellectuals, and also improve their remuneration. 6 is realize to hold a fair and a direct election of the people's representatives. The number 7 is to recognize the legality of the student organization and the movement. We want an official recognition. But 10 years later, none of them has been proved or done. I mean, even like the very simplest one, we need in the number 5, we also want to increase the budget preparation of the education. None of them has been improved and done. So that's why I answer that is no. Nothing's changed. Speaking from another side of this view, the student movement fails. We have to accept it. Yeah, it fails. Hundreds of students are killed, and thousands of them were arrested and put in a jail. And millions suffer because of the Tiananmen Square massacre, the June 4th movement, the pro-democracy movement. But I can say it succeeded. It succeeded because its impact is positive and profound in shaping the foundation of China's democratization. Today, first, I would like to talk about the reason of its failure, the movement, the failure. And then I will talk about the movement's impact on the process of China's democratization. I think why the movement failed, there are many reasons. One of that, I think, is the military is not neutral. Many of us know Mao Zedong's famous saying, "Power comes from the gun." Communist Party, they do believe the violence. They always said the party should direct the gun. So why the guns always listen to the party when they ask them to open fire to the students and the citizens without arms? I think the reason is because of the soldiers' ignorance and also lacking of the information. You know, the Chinese Communist Party control all the media in China. The flow of information is monopolized in this autocratic society. All dictators fully understand if they want to control people's body, and then they have to control the brain first. Actually, before the soldiers were sent to the Beijing, all the soldiers were prohibited to read the newspaper and also listen to the radio, watch TV. All the information they get come from the official ways. So I just have a couple questions. If they had all the information about the students' movement and the movement going on in Beijing, would they open fire? And also, would they turn around their gun against dictators like in Romania? I mean, in Romania, like the soldiers did in Romania. I think these two be the questions. The second reason, I think, is something related to the leaders' psychological. I think something is related to the culture. I would call it the philosophy of fighting. In the Communist Party, I mean, in Chinese history, competitors have never have a sense of sharing. And when they fight, after the fight, either you die or I die. And just only one can survive. The competitors never get a chance to survive. Although we think we are not competing the power with the Communist Party, but we just want to push them to do the reformation. But Deng treat us like competitors. That's what Deng said to his followers. He said, if they take over the power, thousands of our heads will fall on the ground. He deeply feared that they will lose the power and his head will be cut off. Actually, as everybody is well known, the fact is well known, the students never give up their non-violence principle. Even the army opened fire. And I think this probably is the Deng's fear, and then why he moved so many soldiers, armies, to against students without arms. And the third reason, I think the students' movement failed because we lacked a coherent and strong national opposition party or organization to lead the movement. The 89 student movement in this is a nationwide student movement, but all local student organizations are independent of each other. In order to let you know something about the local students movement, I would like to take the Canton as example to explain a little bit, so you can have a sense of the local student movement. The Canton student movement begins in the end of the April and lasts until August. Before June 4th, we also organized the hunger strike, assembly, parade demonstration, and still sitting, continuing in front of the province government building. After June 4th, we de-blocked the major bridge and a major traffic intersection in the city. But we immediately withdraw back to the school as soon as we know the government want to use the army, the military to against us. Afterwards, we concentrate on two tasks. I mean, the Student Federation in Canton. One is we make many copies of the video and the newspaper from overseas, like in Hong Kong, and send them to the north, and send them to other people. We try to break the blockage, the news blockage by the government. And the second thing we did is we cover and help the students in another distance from the North China, and then help them to escape to the overseas. But this underground activity doesn't last long. The major leaders of the movement were arrested, and the movement also was suppressed, like other cities. Because we didn't have a national organization, we lack of the long-term and a nationwide strategy to keep the movement alive. And I think I can illustrate other reasons why the movement fails. Like actually, in 1989, it's not a movement all the social classes participate. Only the students, and I mean, probably the intellectuals, the social elites. So actually, we did realize, and if we want to achieve the goals, probably we need to mobilize the farmers and the workers. But it was too late at that time. Although the movement failed, but I think in some degree it succeeded. It do have some impacts, positive impacts on the process of China democratization. First of all, it shakes the legal foundation of the communist authority, the government. In order to maintain the power, the government, the Communist Party has to do more economic reformation. Right after June 4th, Deng said, we should never drop the open policy. Means they are open to the foreign country. Because he understands the Communist Party would totally lost control over the people if he couldn't develop economics. With the development of the free economics, people have more choice and a freedom space. And also, they have more freedom to do other activities. Like in the southern China, in Shenzhen, Guangzhou, I know a lot of students after June 4th, they were like dismissed by the school. They couldn't find a job in the northern China. They all went to the southern China because they can find a job, make living, or develop their individual goals in a private company, joint venture, and a foreign company. So the economic reformation do provide some more freedom in southern China. Also help those students who involved the June 4th, the students' movement, they can survive and make a living. And also this become some kind of preparation of the later democratic opposition movement in China. Also, the Tiananmen massacre and the later persecution awake a huge amount of the people who truly believe in the communism before. But after June 4th, they totally desperate to the communism. And many of them become the democracy fighters. Like the last year, the first time the Chinese people organized publicly, organized the party, China Democratic Party, to challenge the Communist Party. Most of these leaders and these leaders who were involved in the June 4th, the students' movement in 1989. Also, I think because after the June 4th, many people criticized, said the people, especially the young people, they don't care. They are frosty to the politics. And some people feel kind of disappointed. But I think for long term, this is probably not a bad thing, because all these, especially young people, they just change their mind and they pursue their own interest, and the individualism prevailed in China, which is I think it's a necessary kind of condition which lead in a democratic society. So for a long time, I think it's good for China. The 89 movement, students movement, it fails, but also it succeeds. I think it succeeds because for long term, he has the profound impact on the process of the China's democratization. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Our third speaker is Jing Cheng, who is General Secretary of the Tiananmen Generation Association. He went to study atmospheric physics at Peking University in 1986. During the 1989 student movement, he was one of the 7 founders of the preparation committee of the Autonomous Student Union of Peking University, known as ASUPU. ASUPU was the first autonomous student union in Beijing in the 1989 movement and the most influential member of the Federation of the Autonomous Student Unions in Beijing. Throughout the movement, he worked in ASUPU as an executive director of the Standing Committee, the General Secretary, and Vice President. After the June 4th crackdown, he was wanted by the Beijing municipal government, but with the help of the Hong Kong Alliance, he was smuggled out of China and came to the United States. He has since received his BS from the University of San Francisco and his MBA from Columbia Business School in New York. Currently, he is starting his own business in San Francisco. I'm very pleased to introduce Jing Cheng.
Thank you, David, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the Independent Institute for giving me this opportunity to speak here. And also I would like to thank Carl Close for arranging this panel. Today my topic is Tiananmen Square movement and China. It's a big topic. Being a participant and a student leader in the movement, I would like to share with you my thoughts on this movement from the perspectives of the history of China. Hopefully Professor Brook can give me some credit on that. So based on my understanding of the history, as many of you know here, before 1989, China has experienced a series of historical events which set the ground for the democracy movement. We can track it down to 1919, the May 4th movement. But I would like to start here from 1949, when the Chinese Communist Party drove the nationalist government away to Taiwan and established the People's Republic of China. Mao called his revolution a new democratic ideology revolution. In Chinese, is 新民主主义革命. Very nice name. His party was fully supported by the Chinese people, intellectuals, workers, peasants, and even many business people. Chinese people were all expecting a great new China. Everybody is pretty excited. This China in which people will become masters of the country. Unfortunately, they only found themselves in a series of man-made disasters, one after another. Anti-counter-revolutionaries movement, anti-rightist movement, Great Leap, 3-year natural disaster. They call it natural, but it's man-made disasters. Cultural revolution. According to unpublished official statistics, 80 million Chinese people died unnaturally from 1949 to 1979. Deng Xiaoping a communist reformer removed by Mao during the Cultural Revolution, established his authority in the party and launched the reform and open door policy in 1979. From 79 to 89, the Chinese government has conducted economic reform and some political reform, mainly in the areas of restoring the economic development and the social order that were destroyed by the Cultural Revolution. The economic power of China and the living standard of the Chinese people were greatly improved as the result of the reform. However, Deng's reform barely addressed the key problems of the political system. A one-party system without any check and balance, and the planned economy with very limited private ownership and economic freedom resulted serious corruptions and social injustice. So economic reform seemed reached a dead end without compatible political reform around 1989. Since the end of the Cultural Revolution in 1976, some Chinese intellectuals has been thinking about the cause of China's tragedies and seeking for a solution to transform China into a modern country. Some of them, like Wei Jingsheng, saw the problems with the dictatorship and advocated democracy. Some of them, like Hu Ping, saw the problems with the communist ideology and launched the China Spring overseas. China Spring is a magazine to fight with the communist ideology. Some of them, like Fang Lizhi, saw the problem of freedom of thinking, advocated liberty of thoughts. However, their activities were quite limited to small circles, and their movements were cracked down and contained by the Chinese government. Because of the government's crackdown over the democracy movement, some of the students in 1989 were unaware of the work done by our early generations. However, many of us had experienced the student movement in 1986 and 1987. These two moments are very small scale and pretty much just among the intellectuals and universities lasted for a very, very short period of time. Hu Yaobang, as many of you know, a liberal communist leader, stepped down in 1986 because his sympathy towards the students and the intellectuals who were calling for the freedom of speech and the westernization of China. Nevertheless, many of the students have felt strong dissatisfaction about the reality and the urgency of call for change. Hu's death in April of 1989 triggered another spontaneous student movement. Learning from our lessons in 1986 and 1987, the student movements, the students of Beijing University established the first independent student union in the 1989 student movement to lead and organize the students. The Preparation Committee of Autonomous Student Union of Beijing University, and I happened to become one of the 7 founders of this organization. Unlike the underground student organization in 1986 and 1987, which was cracked down by the government very easily, it operated publicly, and it was very popular among the students, and it seek legal existence with the government. Although we had very limited knowledge about democracy and freedom, we had learned China's constitution, in which it states that every Chinese citizen has the rights of speech, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of assembly, and freedom of protest. We had learned the history of May 4th movement, although although in the Chinese Communist Party's version, and we have read about Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and Poland's solidarity. And many of us had read Gorbachev's New Thinking. Besides organizing the student movement in peaceful demonstrations, the Autonomous Student Union of Beijing University had made 5 achievements. One is set a clear demand for the movement, which incorporate the demand of the students for democracy and freedom with the demands of general public for better living and social justice. 2 is set the principle of peace, rationality, and non-violence for the movement. 3rd is initiated the dialogue with the government. 4th is helped workers and Beijing citizens to establish their independence, to establish their independent associations. 5th is to experiment and practice the democracy. I would like to give a little bit thoughts behind these ideas. Why we try to establish independent student unions? One big reason we think why China, the government is the corruption is so bad, and the political system is so bad, and brought Chinese people so much tragedy and pain, suffering, because there's no check and balance in the government. People has no voice in the government, and whatever the government do, nobody can say no to them. So we think maybe it's better for us to build up some kind of independent force, which is outside of the Chinese government system. Which whenever the Chinese government do something wrong, we can speak out, and we can also input our thoughts into their policy making system. And we expect the workers, peasants, and the citizens, the intellectuals, every group of the society will have the similar organization, so we can inject some checks and balance into the political system. The other reason why we set the principle of peace, rationality, and non-violence, because we all expect China to be transformed in a peaceful way. It's only when China, the opposition force in China, has a peaceful, rational, and non-violent movement, and that will stop China to stop the revolution in China, which a lot of people may prefer revolution, but it really brought Chinese people a lot of, it will bring Chinese a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. The last one I want to point out is the 1989 movement is the first large-scale mass opposition movement in China. And after the crackdown of the 1989 student movement, the opposition movement survived. It survived inside China, it survived overseas, and it became very influential overseas with a lot of support from people like you and from the international community. And it survived inside China, even though the Chinese government has put so many people in jail. But after they came out of jail, many of them have devoted to continue fighting for democracy in China. And I see a very, very good sign of the opposition movement in China. It's virtually in existence before 1989. Now it's almost everywhere. For example, last year's Chinese Democracy Party, which tried to register their legal existence in China, it covers 24 provinces and cities. And I see another change in China, which is very positive. Is many Chinese people after the June 4th Tiananmen Square massacre has abandoned the communist ideology. People no longer believe in communism. I think it's a good sign. Maybe many people began to believe in other things, religions or individualism. But everything's better than communism. And I think this will set a good foundation for China to transform into a democratic country in future. So what are we going to do in future? I think there are two major tasks for the Chinese people and also for our friends who support China. Well, we should continue to support the opposition movement in China, because opposition movement right now is much more mature, and it carries the principle of peace, rationality, and nonviolence. It will for sure become a key factor in the peaceful transformation of China. The other major task is building a new culture for China. I think the Chinese Communist government has destroyed the Chinese traditional culture. And as I like to say, they have two systems of cultural value system. One is called the party culture, which is really the central the essence of the party culture is, I call it 党文化 in Chinese, is history, which is everybody hate each other and try to kill each other, try to stop each other, and try to achieve with any necessary means. As Professor Brook said, this is the order the soldier got from above, so that's why they start killing people. The other culture is called cheating culture. The government cheats you. Like government say, okay, you should be good people. Like you should, contribute yourself to the collectives, to the country, and you should be selfishless, and you should, do good things for other people. But unfortunately, they do nothing of it. So they just want you to be that good person. So the heart of it is really is a slave culture and make you a slave. So they listen to you, listen to the party and do whatever the party want them to do. So keep the party in the leadership all the time. So I think we should continue working on these issues. Of course, the economic progress, I think it's also important. I'm glad to see the Chinese government officially endorsed the free market economy. But I'm pretty sure they are continue doing it, even though I think without any political change, political reform, they cannot go very far. I worked in Hong Kong as a management consultant. I worked with many international companies and state-owned enterprise in China. I saw they have a lot of difficulties without political reform. The government will continue to have heavy intervention in the economic system, and it's very difficult to guarantee the justice and the real free competition in China. So that will create a major barrier. And I think when the economic progress continue going and people will realize this, we'll push the government for political change. And thank you very much for supporting us. And I wish you continue supporting us, and I wish China will become democratic soon. Thank you.
Some of you may have been here in late April when we had George Ayiti speak on Africa, and he termed the abuse of statism in Africa as the mafia state and the vampire state and other terms like that. And obviously you can see a certain continuity in this issue. So we'd like to open it up for questions. Carl has a mic which we'd appreciate if you'd speak into, because we tape these programs and we make them available on our website to people around the world through Real Audio. So, and please let me indicate who the question is for, if not the whole panel.
Microphone is coming.
Yes.
Let's keep it.
Thank you. The question is for Timothy Brooks. You started it at that evening, roughly 9:30. From what reading I've done, and I certainly haven't done the reading you've done, in fact, the government had tried troops before that, but they were local troops. and that they had to bring in distant troops that didn't know the situation before they could be successful. Would you elaborate on this, if you know anything about it?
Yes. Is this working? I don't think it is. Is there a switch here? Is it working? Oh, okay. You've asked an extraordinarily complex question. Or the question was simple, but the answer is going to be a little complex. The government began to move the army. They began to move several of the group armies based on the North China Plain into the vicinity of Beijing in the second week after the democracy movement started. The movement started on April the 15th with the death of a former communist leader who was viewed sympathetically by students and intellectuals in the country. His death became a moment of memory and commemoration and political activism. The government began to move the two closest group armies into some kind of outlying position around the city without any particular plan of what they were going to do, but they wanted to just have troops on hand. They decided that this requires a little more history. Gorbachev was visiting China on May the 15th, 16th, 17th. This was the historic end to the Sino-Soviet split, or it was supposed to be, and it became a great press opportunity for the student leaders. The government decided that they would use military means, but they had to wait till Gorbachev left. It looked perhaps embarrassing to bring the soldiers in while another state leader is in town. He left on the 18th, and they brought the army in on the 19th. Now, this army was actually composed of units from many parts of China. It wasn't just a local army, but it was composed of units from many parts. They went in without the order to go ahead at any cost. They went in, by and large, without live ammunition. The idea was that you send the army in, a representative sampling of the entire army of the country comes in, and their moral authority is hopefully so popular, so high that people will give way and they'll let the army come in and it will be a happy resolution. And that didn't work. The army was stalled for 3 days, and eventually the order went in for them to retreat. Now, when they retreated, they regrouped outside the city, but they then had the political command felt that they wanted a representative unit from every group army in the country. And there are roughly 24 group armies around the country. So that the idea for the final suppression is that it's not going to be one army or even 5 or 6 armies, but it's going to be every army, if you like, is going to show solidarity, or if you like, is going to share the blood if there's any blood to go around. The logic here is that you don't want a split in the army. You don't want one part of the army doing it, and then the rest of the army said, you're engaging in shenanigans that we don't approve of. Now, in fact, it appears that there were casualties from friendly fire, as it's called, during the suppression, when soldiers of one group army shot, by mistake, soldiers from another group army in the back. And there seems to have been a military face-off for a couple of days. It took the Chinese leadership a week before it would actually say anything about the massacre, and that was because there was a lot of political wheeling and dealing that had to go on. So, in a sense, your question is, well, your question is right in asking what are the sensitivities in the military to all of this. Of course, after it was all over, every soldier that you talked to said, well, I wasn't involved in it, my unit was involved in it, it was somebody else, and everyone hustled very quickly to deny that they had been involved. My sense, well, let me share with you a personal thing here. I was a student in China in the mid-70s, as was mentioned, and my roommate was in the People's Liberation Army, and we'd fallen out of touch. But when I was back in October of 1989 to do the research for the book, after I'd left, he got in touch with me and gave me to indicate that there was great unhappiness within the military about what they'd done. I think that if you like, the junior officer corps didn't like being used for this kind of thuggery in the streets. There was a lot of division within the army. And the way in which the government has handled that over the last 10 years is to increase the military budget. which they've done with great glee. And in one way, this sort of buys the military off. And in another way, it's also trying to keep the military. I mean, there's a kind of curious logic here that if you give the military lots of money, then they'll go away and they won't interfere in politics. And I think that's been some of the logic. I'm sorry, I've turned your simple question into a long answer, so I'll stop with that.
Any more questions?
Thank you. This is for Professor Brook. In this connection, which you just discussed, I remember something in a local paper within 2 months after the massacre that some 40 or 50 officers, Army officers, were shot for, I guess, not carrying out orders or for being in sympathy with the movement. Can you speak to that?
Yes, that's a rumor that I also heard. And in fact, some people, when I was visiting Beijing, some people claimed they could say where the executions were carried out. I have never found any reliable confirmation that that happened. It may have been wishful thinking on the part of the people of Beijing who felt that the military had behaved so badly that somebody should have taken them out and shot them, or alternatively, that many of the soldiers and officers didn't want this duty, that they had refused to do it and they'd been shot for it. But it's nothing that I've ever been able to confirm from my own research.
This is a question addressed to anyone on the panel. Why was the loss of life so horrendous? Was it simply because the soldiers had no training in crowd control, or was there an attempt to make an example of the demonstrators and to attempt to stamp out the movement by the slaughter that actually occurred?
I just gave my version of the story. I think this is a very complicated issue. Basically, based on my understanding, why the soldiers are starting killing people. One big reason is, the citizens in Beijing really try to stop the soldiers. I think the soldiers, they got order from the higher rank officials to enter the city with any necessary means. So there might be some confrontation between the Beijing citizens and the soldiers. Some of them may be hurt, or some of them may be angry. I don't know. But when somebody starts shooting, I think they will not stop. So when you see the first blood, then they just continue doing it, because after they committed this crime, it doesn't matter how many people they shoot, 1 or 2 or 20 or even 100.
Yeah, another reason the people said why the soldiers continue to open fire and also killed the people who, it's not necessary. They need to kill them. That there is social class conflict here. Most of the soldiers from the countryside, and they usually the soldiers from the countryside, from the farms, they were poor. We know the social gap is really big in China, so that's why the soldiers, they before they enter the city, they already have some kind of anger. So when they has the order, also like June said, some other reasons, they open fire, and they just continue to do it and kill the innocent people.
Perhaps if I might also add, using semi-automatic weapons in an urban setting is usually a formula for high casualties, because it's different than on a battlefield. People are scattered. Hundreds of people massed on the street. You open fire into that group, and you have very high casualties very quickly. So, in part, it's the technology that was used. I don't think that the army was thinking about teaching anyone a lesson. They got desperate, and their political masters told them they had to solve this by morning, and so they ended up doing what they did. So I'm not sure that there's any sort of more ulterior kind of motive going on here. I think everyone, not just the students, but the soldiers and the government, were shocked by the casualties, and I tend to think that the numbers went into the low thousands and didn't remain in the hundreds.
One question I had to follow up on that, Tim. The immediate killings in Beijing went up through what period of time, would you say?
The killings started on the night of June the 3rd, and that went on until about June the 7th. Mm-hmm. There continued to be sporadic shooting of civilians by soldiers who were just driving by in trucks, and they would open fire.
Okay.
I have to also point out what I saw in Beijing. I think after the June 4th massacre, the soldiers themselves was frightened. And when I passed the Chang'an Street, when I tried to leave the Beijing city, I saw the soldiers. They grouped them together and back to back, try to watch everywhere to see if there's any suspicious person coming through, whatever. And whenever they saw something they don't like, they just go ahead and shoot into that direction. So I still saw people like go up there and try to call their bad names. Then they shoot them and those people they try to escape. So that's what happened. I think a lot of soldiers were frightened.
Even though, of course, the citizenry is totally unarmed in Beijing, too. Go ahead.
What happened to the student that stood out in front of the tanks, and what was his name?
That, as I said earlier, there's just, maybe Tim knows more about it, but I've heard that at this point nobody knows for sure. Is that?
The Amnesty International reported soon after the event that his name was Wang Weilin, and that he was not a student but somebody working in a business, but that was then later retracted, and no one seems to know. It's a great mystery, because the photograph that we saw today of the man standing in front of the tank is, of course, one of the memorable photographs of the 20th century, and the man has not yet been identified. I fear that he has, that the Chinese government identified him and has removed him, and we may never know who it was.
For the student leaders, what policy do you think the United States government should be pursuing towards the Chinese government to promote the democratic reforms at this point? Is there much that the United States government should do, or would efforts likely to be clumsy and counterproductive? Do you think it's effective? What would be effective?
I think the United States government has a lot of influence on Chinese government, but they probably don't realize that. And I feel like the US government right now try to sweeten the relationship with the Chinese government using a great excuse of engagement. Personally, I agree with engagement. But how can you engage with the Chinese government? Agree with everything they did? That's probably not the right engagement. I think U.S. government, if they really want to influence China, they have to have confidence in themselves, not being directed by the business interest. And also, I think in the long term, a better China, democratic China, is good for U.S. business. And I think they should continue pursue the human rights issues in China, and they should continue to say no to the Chinese government on whatever they did wrong.
Yeah, I think when the American government deal with the Chinese government, like the most important things are like the trade in the business. I think when they deal with the Chinese government, do they really await the value you believe, or weight that a little bit more, or weight the profit a little bit more? That's I think that probably is the key point.
One more question.
I'd rather not be the last questioner. My question may not be that profound, but I'm an economist, and I really hope for the kind of solution that Jing is mentioning, that economics can bring about the eventual political change needed. My concern is talking with Chinese, young Chinese in China who share those very same hopes, but are believing that China, because of its very basic and long-standing culture, is going to be very slow to change. It's not even so much a dislike of the Communist Party. As a matter of fact, they believe perhaps the Communist Party needs to be a part of the change, but the concern that it's so deeply embedded in the Chinese culture that many of the people already are blaming, really, the students and the people who brought about the 1989 demonstrations for having a great disruption, feeling to them more like previous years. So the question is just how serious is that, and what is the likelihood for being able to bring about real change?
Well, I agree with you. The economic progress doesn't necessarily result political change in China, doesn't necessarily result a democratic China. I think it's only one part of the condition. I think the other most important part, as I mentioned in my speech, there are two major tasks we have to carry forward. One is continue support the opposition movement inside China. I think the opposition movement is a key factor, as I pointed, of the peaceful transformation of China, because the opposition movement will bring in check and balance into China's political system, and they will continue to put pressure on the Chinese government to make changes. The other, as you pointed, is the cultural issue. I think the Chinese people doesn't have much idea about what is a real democracy, because I think a democracy is not necessarily a system. It's more likely a system of a system of values, what you believe in. Do you respect other people's opinion? Do you respect opposition, the existence of opposition? Do you tolerate different ideas? Do you believe in what other people? Do you believe in other people's right to speak differently? Do you believe in other people's human rights? So I think there's a lot of issues we have to solve here in the Chinese culture. So that's why I'm personally thinking that we should rebuild the culture of China to build in this modern values into the traditional Chinese culture. Then that way we probably can fundamentally resolve the problem.
we've really run over time. All right, one quick question.
Okay, this is for all of you. Sometimes the situation in China looks very hopeful. Sometimes it looks absolutely depressingly futile. And so I'm just curious to kind of end off here. As three experts on the subject, could you give us your expert forecasts on how long will it be before China finally achieves freedom and democracy?
Personally, I hope it comes soon as possible. But just wish. I think to achieve the real democracy and freedom in China, it will take not only one generation, probably several generations. Long process we need to work. But I do believe probably have some changes. I mean, like political changes in China several years later. Because I think the people's mind are always change. Like Jin and I all both talk about the culture. Like in China, we say the Communist Party not only try to manage your kitchen for you, also they try to manage your bedroom for you. So, you know, the control is everywhere. They control every aspect of your life. So I think we do need, except besides the change, I mean, in the system, the political fields, we do need change in the culture and the traditions. That's a long way we need to we have to go.
Jing, any predictions?
Yeah, I'm not a fortune teller, but I'm pretty optimistic about the changes in China. For example, just 10 years ago, you virtually see no opposition movement in China, as I mentioned. But now you see the dissidents everywhere, not only in the United States, but also in China, like the Chinese Democracy Party, like Ding Zilin, like Li Hai, like many of them who've been put into jail, but after they come out, they continue fighting for democracy. They persistently fighting for democracy. So I think as long as we are persistent, we continue our effort, maybe for 5 years, maybe for 10 years, maybe for one generation, as Dan said, I think one day we will achieve. And I think we just need to be patient, and we need to be persistent, and we need to continue work on it.
Well, as a historian, I get to predict the past rather than the future, and I think the only thing that I would just support what Jing has said, and what I would add is that we should be prepared to perhaps not to recognize democracy when it comes to China. Democracy is not any one thing. It is a set of standards, relationships, and ideas that are going to vary in every cultural setting, so that we shouldn't necessarily expect China to turn out the way the United States has, nor, however, can we use that to say, well, they do something we don't like, but it's Chinese, and so we won't worry about it. I mean, at some level, there are basic rights, I think, that have to be respected in all societies, the most basic being that you don't kill somebody. And once that right has been respected around the world, I think the world as a whole will be a far more democratic place.
I want to thank all of our speakers, in particular. I want to thank Professor Brook for his really pioneering work. It's a lot of work to do what he's done. And I want to thank our two Chinese leaders for the real heroism and commitment to principle that they've exhibited for years. A couple of things I also want to mention in reference to the last question and also their comments. if democracy means dictatorship by the majority, that's not exactly what I think people are talking about. They're talking about democracy in the way Tocqueville talked about it in his book, Democracy in America, a system of civil institutions in which people have liberties and the ability to pursue their lives without the threat of indiscriminate violence, and the secure in themselves and their property and their families and so forth. I do think that one of the things that China and any society like that is facing, which they cannot control, is the revolution of technology. And the technological revolution is making the ability to impose order by regimes more and more difficult with every passing day. So that is a tool that I think that we will see more and more evident as time passes. One other small thing before I'll just wrap up quickly is many people also don't know that the goddess of democracy and the Statue of Liberty and other symbols have a very interesting and ancient historical roots to essentially beacons from the ancient worlds. And these beacons were largely lighthouses. And so I'll just point that out since I'm standing in front of one. Also, Professor Brook has very kindly indicated that he would be delighted to autograph copies of his book. If you have a copy, if you don't, you should get one. Also, we do have posters of the famous tank lineup in front of the students, and if I could recommend, I would think that our two student leaders would be interested and persuadable to autograph copies if you're interested in getting copies. Yeah. It's actually, we get this from a firm in France that has the rights to it. The last thing I'll mention is we hope that you will be joining with us at future independent policy forums. And if you have any questions about our program, please let me know. Thank you so much for joining with us, and good night.